All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our PEDC series of webinars, which are around the work that a small group has done on the CRSE competencies. These are culturally relevant, sustaining education competencies, and I was very pleased to be involved in the work. Today, I'm going to talk about my work at Gannon University on our Expressive Arts course, which has been a traditional education course and is now going through the process to become a course open to all students at the university. So I titled my presentation, Small Steps, Big Impact, because you're going to hear all of the steps I took along the way, and hopefully once we're done, you'll agree with me that it's been impactful. So let's get started. So first, I wanted to take a moment to set the stage for what we're going to engage in today. I want to emphasize that this is a safe space. If you feel like you need the recording to be paused so that you can talk about and ask the questions you want to ask, we can definitely do that. Just let us know. We're not going to be critical of you, and we hope you won't be critical of me, because this is important work to me. And know that I consider myself a learner, not a knowledge giver. I'm definitely still learning about the process. I invite you to participate throughout. My colleague Luca is here. Luca is going to be looking for hands raised and tell me when there are questions dropped in the chat, and he'll keep us all on track. So please feel free to participate and shout out your questions as we go. I expect that there will be several questions, and I'm going to share what comes from my heart. I hope you will share what comes from your heart. And I think one of the most important things I've learned over the past year is to enter into things assuming there are good intentions behind the things people say. If I should say something and you think I'm being combative, I'm not. I am coming from a place of honesty and authenticity. So wanted to set the stage for that and hope that you will join with me in hearing about the work. So today, I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of contextual information. Then I'll go on and talk about the revision of this education course to turn it into a liberal core course that includes some of the CRSE competencies. I'll discuss the challenges that I encountered and how collaboration was really critical to helping me get to where I'm at. I'll provide you with a couple of strategies for success, and at the end, invite you to interact further. So that's kind of what's ahead, and here we go. So I work at Gannon University. We're in Erie, Pennsylvania. We also have a campus in Ruskin, Florida, but I'm located in Erie. We were founded in 1925. We're a four-year Catholic university. We emphasize liberal arts, professional skills, faith-based learning. We have relatively small class sizes, a 13-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio, and around 4,000 students. They're divided across the two campuses, about 3,300 undergrads. And that's primarily the population that this course is going to be aimed at. So I thought that might be important. Being a Catholic institution, you cannot walk across campus without tripping over some sort of image of Jesus. So I wanted to make sure I threw that on the slide, because that's a big part of who we are and what we do here. Again, we're located in Erie, Pennsylvania. If you're not familiar with Pennsylvania's geography, we are right on Lake Erie. The institution actually owns a boat, and we can see the lake from our windows here. We are in an urban center, which is also one of the, I think it's like 6 or 7 refugee resettlement centers in the US. So we have a high degree of diversity downtown. Our institution is also located in the zip code 16501, which a few years back was the poorest zip code in the US. I think we're still in the top 5. So a lot of diversity, a lot of economic need, a lot of students. We're also in a unique position that our city is not very large, so we're within 25 minutes of driving to suburban and rural locations. Our education programs primarily draw white, female, suburban, and rural students. and many of them are student athletes in the School of Education. So I thought those contextual factors might be of interest for you to know kind of the population. I'm getting them ready to work with this super diverse inner city group, and they're coming from something completely different. The School of Education was recently tasked with several things. We had to revise our curriculum to include a brand new set of liberal core courses. So we changed all of like our gen ed courses, and that was a real challenge. We were also asked to reduce overall credits to become more competitive with other institutions in the state. And so we looked at this and said, oh my goodness, how can we put more PDE competencies in, fewer credits, and streamline everything? So as I started working on this project, I also became a member of PEDC and realized that the work of PEDC was going to help me in my this task in the School of Ed. And I decided that instead of rewriting a course for education majors, I was going to create a course or take the course that exists. Instead of rewriting it just for ed majors, make it for everybody on campus. So that was sort of my goal, and that allows me to meet those liberal core things as well as the CRSE piece, or at least a small part of it. I saw this as a great opportunity to revise our education programs. Again, we have a combination of undergraduate and graduate programs, traditional, online, intern, and residency programs. Like everyone else in the state, we have enrollment concerns. We have programs across the board in a variety of areas, and we are 5 full-time faculty. So when you think about the large task that we've been given, it's been very, very challenging for us. Get all of these new competencies in, do the university stuff, drive enrollment, and so forth with only 5 of us. So here's my story. I want you to start by taking a look at the image that I'm providing on the screen right now. And I want you to record your thoughts mentally or in writing. I don't want you to say them out loud yet. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But I want to start with this image and what you think this image might represent or why I might have this image here. It does tie into the presentation, and I will reveal later, but just take a moment and look at this person or image. I guess she's not a real person right now. She's pretty static. All right. Now, keep her in mind as we go through the presentation. So once again, we were looking at reducing credits. We were looking at new PDE competencies. On campus, we also have a big DEI initiative that started several years back. And we were looking at a new university core. So my big question was how, and I had to think out of the box, hence the little box with the arrow. And as I said, I decided to make this revision something that would make it useful for the university core, which would help us reduce credits. The course I worked on was an expressive arts course. Typically, it had met a fine arts requirement in the past, and the fine arts requirement was going away. There is no longer a fine arts requirement, so I needed to figure out what can I do with this course. It previously had only enrolled education majors, and so I felt in some ways like the university was trying to push me back instead of letting me walk forward. They were making me walk back, like, oh no. So my task was to align it with the new core, and they have something in the new core called aesthetic reasoning. But when I read the aesthetic reasoning guidelines, they spoke to me about the culturally relevant sustaining education guidelines. So if I was going to go that direction, I had to revise the course to make it open to all majors. And our aesthetic reasoning competencies at the university include a sentence that says, analyze a diversity of artworks within the context of various cultural and historical epochs. And to me, when I saw the word diversity in there and cultural in there, okay, I can use this. I'm going to dual purpose my time. And that was very helpful to me. So my goal really was to try to create more overlap with the course so that I could use core courses in the ed program. And it appeared to me to be an opportunity to integrate the CRSE competencies. Here are the sorts of things that I did in the revision process. First, I looked at what the elements of a good syllabus were. And our PEDC group came together and sort of identified things that we wanted to have in every syllabus. On my own campus, though, we also did a book study. We did a series of professional development sessions around inclusive syllabi. And we thought about not just things like a land acknowledgement statement, but also the tone with which you write things, how you design things visually. So I was able to combine the professional development from the university with what I was learning through PEDC. And then I took a look. So the next part was to take a real close look at those competencies. It's kind of scary to have these 9 categories with all these sub indicators, and it felt really overwhelming. So I had to start thinking, which ones can I use in this course? And if you look at my first reflections, they're posted on the PEDC website. I'm like, oh, I want to do all of these competencies in this course. And as I started to work through it, I realized that that was silliness and I should not do that. It would not serve the students well. And I decided that I needed to really focus, and I chose competencies number 3 and 8 for my focus and sort of developed for myself a set of essential questions around those competencies. And from there, the next thing I did was to really do some research. I wanted to make sure that the course connected to things that are in the local environment here in Erie that our students would be seeing and interacting with, because I wanted to make the CRSE competencies and the coursework really come alive for them and be meaningful for them. So I had to do a lot of research. And I feel like I spent so much time in trying to figure out what Erie has to offer. So I identified that diversity of artworks. And it kind of looked like this. If you were going to visualize my process, it was just me running around in circles and not making any sense for a long time, because I was like piecemealing it. I'll do a little bit here and I'll do a little bit here and I'll do a little bit here. And then I would take a week off and come back. I really should have, one of my pieces of advice would be that when you work on this work, it's not something that can be done quickly. It takes a lot of time to delve into the competencies and really be thoughtful. And so I wish I had taken the time up front instead of doing this sort of running around piece. But the many small steps still led where I wanted them to. So right now, I've talked for a few minutes. I'd like to invite you to drop into the chat what challenges you anticipate. So I'd like to know what sorts of things you think when you integrate the CRSE competencies into a course you might run into. So take a moment, drop a few of those into the chat.
And Leigh, just so you know, I also put in the chat the link to your page on the PEDC website, and now we've got a couple more folks have joined us. So we are a larger crowd.
Thank you. And welcome to our new friends. So as we think about what challenges you anticipated and you put them into the chat, I'm going to continue on in the background and then try to respond to those challenges as best as I can once I know what you're thinking. So basically I'm saying to you, challenge accepted. You give me a challenge and I will talk to you about how I met that challenge. So I see one of the challenges is ensuring consistency of implementation across instructors, content areas, field placements. And So this took me a lot of legwork to do this process. I really had to go to people's offices and individually talk to them and say, hey, I'm thinking about this and I'm wondering about that. And how do you feel about? So there was a lot of collaboration. And I don't have answers to all of those areas yet because we're still working on it. It wasn't something that we did one time and shelved. It's really an active process that we're continuing to work on. I'm going to talk a little bit about my challenges because maybe as I talk about them, you might also think, oh, that might be a challenge for me too. So in general, the amount of research that I had to do and the amount of time that I had available were not a great match. So that was definitely a challenge for me of how do I do this and do it meaningfully along with everything else that I do. I know we're all super busy people, so I feel like some of you may have that same challenge. And what I ended up doing was I used, thankfully, I was given the gift of a few extra weeks to work on my project. And I went to my cabin in the woods and locked myself away and just kind of worked for 2 weeks without interruptions. And that was very helpful. So I really had to guard my time and had to challenge myself to focus, which is not what I get to do in my daily life. I felt like it was very challenging for me I wanted students to understand how real the competencies are and how they apply in our lives. And so I wanted to talk about the world because the competencies are about people everywhere and diverse perspectives. But I wanted to also localize it to our environment here in the Erie area. So that was challenging for me as well. And then when I decided to shift from I want to do every competency to I'm just going to do competencies 3 and 8, I had to make sure that I was really giving the students a valuable experience with those competencies. And I had to, revise the entire curriculum matrix to have fewer credits. I did encounter a lot of pushback in the beginning with this project, pushback from faculty as well as students. And so I had to really be strategic in how to do that. What I was basically trying to do, and as I look back on it, I realized this, I didn't know it at the time, but I was trying to hit the tipping point where this would be normal and not stuff, because we do have a relatively conservative campus here, and I needed to normalize it for our campus. And so by going to people and talking about the competencies and going to other people and talking about the competencies, I really made an effort to normalize this work instead of see it as sort of siloed work. Within the School of Education, which is my home area, we have a very formal syllabus template to capture sort of PDE requirements. And our director is not, I wouldn't say she's not willing to change the syllabus template. She is, but not willing to change it in the ways that I wanted to change it. I really felt a need to personalize it. I felt a need to put in pieces like a land acknowledgement statement that the university doesn't have yet. And so what I ended up doing was creating a separate document, and I'll share that with you as well. It's also been kind of challenging to go through the approval process because I'm having this course approved, not just as a School of Ed course, but it's being approved for all undergraduate students at the university as a core course. I'm having to jump through a few extra hoops and it's taking me a little bit longer, but the course, I piloted it last spring to some extent, and it will be implemented for sure this spring semester. And again, I experienced pushback from faculty and students.
And Leigh, we've also got a few additional challenges listed in the chat here.
All right, perfect. Would you mind reading those to me?
Yeah, so Deborah has says, similar to what I had said about ensuring consistency of implementation, streamlining the 9 competencies and including real multicultural perceptions that are relatable to authentic life experiences. Thanks for adding that, Deborah.
Yes, thank you so much. That was definitely a challenge for me, especially because I am a white woman. I do not want to try to speak on behalf of other perspectives. I can say that I have my perspectives and I understand other perspectives, but I don't feel like I'm able to speak authentically from I can speak about, but it took me some time to find the right resources and the right people who could speak authentically from other perspectives. And so that was where some of this legwork came in, like running over. We have a multicultural center and saying, do you have, we're a refugee resettlement place. So do you have somebody who would be willing to come in and, it has to be an artist because I wanted them to be engaging with the arts. It's an expressive arts course. And as they're kind of talking to us about artwork, fill us in on some cultural things and some things that are a little different in Erie than they are from maybe a city they previously came from. So I really wanted to have a variety of diverse voices in my classroom. And that's where a lot of that took legwork. It just took a lot of time. And as we go, I'm sure you'll have other questions as well. All right. So I'm just going to run through one example of how I made some changes. There are lots of changes to the syllabus. There's lots of things that I did. I'm just going to run through one example to kind of explain to you what I did with the course that makes it a better course, makes it a more appropriate course. So I took my traditional course. This is a course that's been offered for years and years for education majors. It had been offloaded to an adjunct years ago. So I was reclaiming this course and I was going to make this course part of the CRSE work that we do. So now I'm teaching it, which I love. Previously, it had had a study in there of Piet Mondrian, who has all kinds of works. You're probably familiar with his work. I put his piece, Broadway Boogie Woogie, off to the right. He's a cubist. He works in straight lines and primary colors, red, blue, and yellow. That's his stuff. And so typically I would have them, would give them a canvas. We would lay out some tape and they would paint, and then they would take the tape off and would have white lines, and that was their paint like Mondrian piece. And how would you use that with kids in the classroom? And it was really focused a lot on student engagement. So we were, how you can teach subtraction by taking the paint off, taking that layer of paint off. And I really wanted to make a change in that. And this is sort of one of the things that I think has improved the course. Now, instead of doing that, I show them this. So I'm using the same example. I'm using the same artist, but I'm asking them, what does this look like to you? I'm asking some of those higher order questions. And what does it feel like to you? What do you think the artist might have been thinking? I provide them with a little bit of background on the artist, who's a European immigrant to the US when he was creating this work, that he landed in New York City. And all of a sudden, as soon as they hear New York City, they'll be like, oh, that's the traffic in New York. Look at the buildings and look at the traffic. And you can almost feel it pulsing and moving the way that he has the things set up. And so now we're having a deeper discussion about the immigrant population coming to the US and what it's like to have those cultural pieces that you're losing and then new cultural pieces coming into your life. And we're having these great discussions. So I took that, real basic assignment and was able to think about it. I particularly use this piece, Broadway Boogie Woogie, because there's a lovely match to it on the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art's website, where they have this gentleman, Jason Moran. He's a composer and a musician, and he talks about how he interprets this differently. So he introduces the students to a different lens, that when he looks at it, he sees it as a composer and a musician. And this little video is only a couple of minutes long. I'm not going to play it, but I will see if we can't make it available to you. I'll try to get some email addresses and send it out or something. But when you watch the little video, I think it's a wonderful example of a very intelligent person interpreting this piece as a musical piece. And he plays some boogie woogie music, which then leads us to talk about, well, what is boogie woogie music and when did that appear on the scene? And so know. And so boogie woogie music was super popular during the World War II era. And so I have this little clip of the Andrews sisters singing Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. And the students, if I played, this is again a really short clip, if I play it for them, they'll pick up on the one girl like lifts her skirt a tiny bit above the knee. And we'll talk about how short skirts are today and how skirts used to be. And we talk about sort of ageism as a piece of these competencies. And that then we can look at the relationship between war as a horrible experience. And we have this very happy, joyous music. And why is that? And we have, so it's just made the discussions on a deeper level by looking into things a little more deeply. And then this is where I get super excited, because that led us to talk about, well, what is the roots of boogie woogie music? And boogie woogie music actually comes out of the African American experience. And in Erie, we're fortunate enough to be the hometown of a composer named Harry T. Burleigh. He lived here in the 1800s, early 1900s. He's a composer. He actually listened to his grandfather, who had moved north from the South, who sang Negro spirituals. And he transcribed all of his grandfather's lyrics and then wrote music to go with them. And there's all kinds of music out there about Harry T. Burleigh. So I play this little video, and his home is actually within a few blocks of the university. So we actually walk over there and we look at what part of the community he comes from. And we talk about Harry T. Burleigh. My goal is to find a group from a historically Black college or university and bring them on campus to sing this music. So far, I have been successful in getting the local Philharmonic, the Erie Philharmonic, to play Harry T. Burleigh music for their most recent program. So we just had that recently where they played his music, and that was wonderful. But I'd really like to have a college group come and sing it. But it just opens up. So it talks about his grandmother, and his grandmother was college educated. She spoke 3 languages, because they're thinking, oh, slaves who moved north, enslaved people weren't very well educated. And so it opens up a whole new avenue. And even more cool out of this, we then go, we then go on to talk about that Harry T. Burleigh left Erie, moved to where? New York City. So we're bringing it back to Broadway Boogie Woogie. And the students enjoy that. While he was in New York City, he met Anton Dvorak, who was another immigrant. So Harry T. Burleigh had this huge influence on the immigrant composer community. And if you listen to Dvorak's New World Symphony and you listen to Harry T. Burleigh's work, you hear Harry T. Burleigh's foundational, those Negro spirituals, in Dvorak's New World Symphony. And so I take my class to attend the Philharmonic every year. So they get to hear classical music and think about how its foundations are in folk music and different styles of folk music. And then I let them kind of do some exploration, and their exploration, they have discovered that Erie was part of the Underground Railroad. So we went and we visited one of the houses with a basement that leads out to a pier where you can get on a boat and go across the pond to Canada. They also have investigated ties to Indigenous Americans, and they now know that there is an Indigenous tribe nearby, the Seneca tribe, and they have sent speakers to the university to meet with us. And we had a big thing last spring with all sorts of Indigenous artwork and brought their artists in. And so then I was really excited at this point, but I also was not excited because I wasn't able to put all of that in my syllabus. So I had to create something that I called the syllabus companion. And it was cool because I gave students both versions in the spring. They were very rough, but I gave them both versions to get feedback from my students. And what I found is they loved the idea of reflecting on the original version of the syllabus and my syllabus companion. And out of that, they understood that writing things super formally for that PDE version versus sort of the informal writing presenting graphics in my syllabus instead of all black text on white background. Like they sort of understood and they talked about in class how they can translate that into the work they're doing in their own classrooms, how they can reformat their assignments, how they can now make assignments more engaging by localizing, they're global, but localizing them as well. And so it was a super rewarding piece. One of the most rewarding things for me was a student who in the beginning said, Dr. Forbes, I don't like the fact that we're doing all this CRSE stuff. I don't want to be a teacher of diversity. I want to be a teacher of English. And I said, okay, hang with me for a while. We've been together since your freshman year. Hang with me for a while. At the end of the course, she was still a little uncertain. Then she student taught. And when she went out and she student taught, she came back and she said, I understand what you were doing now. I understand how important it is to meet the needs of all students. I see the elements of what you were trying to get across to us, looking at things through different lenses, understanding cultural backgrounds, understanding the influence of socioeconomic situations, single parent situations, incarcerated parents, like all of the things, because I provide for them lots of artwork that has all of those things as backgrounding information. She finally understood it and came back and said she was so glad that we had been working on these CRSE competencies throughout her coursework. So that was super rewarding. And the students have really, they bulk at first for me because they're all white middle-class girls. It takes me a little while to get them in tune, but they come along and then good things happen. So those are sort of the changes that to me were significant. It made the course a whole lot more exciting to teach and much deeper. In my syllabus companion document, then, we don't have a university land acknowledgement statement, but after working with my students, they recommended that we develop a statement. So we worked together, my class and I, to create our statement about respecting Indigenous people and their land. And ours says, Gannon's School of Education operates on the ancestral territory of the Erie, Seneca, and Haudenosaunee. We actually had one of the local tribe members come in and help us learn how to pronounce that because it was really a hard word for us, Haudenosaunee. Confederacy, which used to be called the Iroquois Confederacy, but their tribal name is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Much of the area was seized by the United States in 1784 through the Six Nations of New York Treaty, a cession agreement. However, the triangle lands, if you look at Pennsylvania, there's this little triangle on the top that forms the sort of the chimney of Pennsylvania. Those were called the triangle lands, and they were seized illegally. They were not initially part of the land agreement. And my students took such joy in finding this out by inviting these Indigenous folks to come and talk with us and doing some internet research, that they were included in the city of Erie, but they were not actually legally sold by the Indigenous Americans. So there had to be many negotiations, and what happened is they negotiated with terms that weren't legal. So we know that the land our university is on was illegally purchased. They did not go through the correct procedures. And not until 1792 did the US federal government sell the lands to Pennsylvania for 75 cents an acre. And that sale to Pennsylvania was illegal because they had never legally purchased it from the Indigenous Americans who were here. And 75% per acre, my students think that's a crazy number. Super cheap. Loss of the triangle lands deprived the Haudenosaunee of their heritage lands and privileged the colonists with access to the shores of Lake Erie and the riches of the land. So if the Native Americans no longer had access to the lake that they're used to fishing in, it's all white folk now, that put them at a huge disadvantage. And my students are really shocked to understand that. They have never given it that much thought. So I end it with, to help us develop deeper understanding of the indigenous peoples who came before us, I will provide opportunities to examine colonization, forced removals, and the erasure of Native communities. Acknowledging the experiences of indigenous peoples will help us recognize that America's story starts with their story. And I hope you will join me in this ongoing commitment to cultural understanding. So I wrote it with a group, that first paragraph with a group of students. I added on my own little, hey, I'm going to talk about this. This might be uncomfortable for you. And then we have to sort of in class negotiate through that a little bit, because they'll be like, Dr. Forbes has an agenda. And I'm like, yeah, I do, but it's a good agenda. So I have to ask their trust in bearing with me. But so I put that, I wasn't able to put it into our formal template. I had to put things like this into the companion document. I actually created 2 companion documents. One is sort of what I call the syllabus companion. And then the other is an appendix that lists all of the artworks that we'll use for the semester, so that if I'm no longer teaching this course, somebody else knows the artworks that should be used, and they've been researched from every corner of the globe. I have included so many of our international students, our international faculty, in identifying these things. They are both available in the repository. So hopefully, I know Luca has dropped a link in the chat. Hopefully you can go over there and find them if you're interested. And so that's kind of how I approach things. Everything from thinking globally and being confused, running around in circles, getting it down to creating my formal syllabus for the university, and then creating my companion document and appendix. So I want to come back to this. At the beginning of the session, I asked you to take a look at this image and think about what this image might represent, mean, show. And I'm curious to know if anybody gave that any thought, anything about this image that you noticed up front and kind of stuck with you. And you could feel free to unmute and just shout it out. What did you think? Is this a real person, not a real person? What does this person represent?
Hi, I'm Deborah Johnson. Hello.
Hi, Deborah.
And thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
She looks like a cartoon, one of those newer cartoons. However, I was attracted to it because she's pretty. She has beautiful eyes. Her hair looks nice. Her background, her outfit matches the background. So it's basic blue colors, but it looks like a formalized outfit of sorts. But she looks sad to me. Even with her beauty, of course, I see a white woman. And I just thought it was a pretty picture, but it wasn't so much a friendly, happy picture, but one that was reflective enough that I could look at it and get all of these different things from her.
I appreciate that. Those are a lot of rich ideas and thoughts around it. You have hit the nail on the head in so many ways, Deborah. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Sherry, anything that you're thinking about this image?
My first thought was that it was an AI generated picture, because I know that that's where so much of education is heading, dealing with AI and how to incorporate it into courses. I thought too, it is a picture of a very pretty young woman, but looking like she is directionless. That's sort of where I was seeing that. And again, what Deborah had mentioned too, that her outfit looks very futuristic, but it also blends into the background, that there are a lot of similarities there.
So you are both right on target. Love it. So you remember I showed you the Mondrian cubist painting that I so when I got to the end of that unit, when we were talking about Mondrian and that cubist painter and how as a painter, he had influenced other folks. that we can then trace that to the musical movement, which became very sharp, staccato in terms. So we were able to kind of make connections between the visual arts and the musical arts, theater arts in the time period. And so I said to them, I'm just going to show you an AI image generator, and we're going to play with it together. So I asked them, what would you like the image generator to create for you tonight? And they said, it was spring, so Mother's Day was coming up, and we were talking about how in school we do art projects around Mother's Day. So they said mother. So I asked AI to generate an image of a mother in the style of Piet Mondrian. So when you look at it, do you see the red, the yellow, the blue? Do you see the sharp lines? Like very cubist looking. And then when it came up, the students were confused. They said, well, how do we know she's a mother? And I said, oh, it's pretty easy to know she's a mother. I know why she looks like a mother. Do you folks know why she looks like a mother?
She looks tired.
She looks tired, those eyes. And when you said directionless, sometimes you're just like, I don't know, the baby is crying and I don't know what to do. And so we had a nice little conversation about that. But it also led to an even cooler conversation that they all went, well, why is she white? And I said, that's an awesome question. Why is she white? And so we went back and we took a look at like book covers, magazine covers. We looked at social media, like who gets the attention, right? And so many of Mother's Day cards and like all of those have white folks in them. And so it generated this fabulous discussion in class. And so I really think the integration of these CRSE pieces has made this class a much more meaningful, much deeper discussion than here are some arts and crafts projects you can do with your students in class. They're now seeing, oh, I can do my social studies. The one girl did her social studies unit around these different paintings by different artists. Some are Black artists from the Revolutionary War era. Some are white artists. Some are on the British side. Some are on the American side. And she has her students do a gallery walk around looking at all of them, comparing and contrasting and figuring out what the message is. And I don't think she ever would have done that if I hadn't changed up the course and had this different lens on it. So the course used to result in a portfolio of their art projects. It does not anymore. Starting in the spring, once it's completely approved for the liberal core process, they will be creating a statement explaining what piece of artwork they chose to discuss, and they'll be evaluating it and discussing the cultural implications, the background of the artist, and how that's being shown. So the new prompt is a much deeper prompt for this activity. It's no longer just a collection of their own artwork. So my advice to you, because I'm assuming you came to the webinar to get some advice, maybe that's a poor assumption, but I'm going to go with it, is to find people who have like minds. At our university, we're a super conservative university. So a few years back, we did have people who were afraid to speak up and talk about important issues. I am not a person, if you know me, you know that I don't keep my mouth shut for very long. I am constantly raising questions that sort of call the question of our administrators and higher ups. And some days they don't like that a whole lot, but I don't let go. And even if they wouldn't let me create anything formal, I went and I found people that I felt I could trust. And we created like a little group. We called ourselves the Racial Justice Task Force for a while. And eventually the university got tired of hearing from us. Nobody asked us, but we would send out recommendations for things. And they got tired, and now we have an entire diversity office that we didn't used to have. And I'm co-leading a group on cultural understanding and identity formation with one of my colleagues in the engineering department. So, find like minds and walk the walk, talk the talk. Meet, act, plan, and act. So don't let the opportunity slip by just because you feel like, well, what will happen if I speak up, and how are people going to think of me? And I would encourage people of color to join with your white allies, because I think it's stronger when it's not coming from any particular subgroup, that it's a fully representative group. Build capacity. So once you get 2 or 3 people, keep bringing more people to the table, invite them to dinner, have drinks with them. You know, I go around to classrooms with a basket of candy and I'll be like, knock, knock, knock. Hi, it's me. I'm going to give your whole class candy. And I'm going to talk for 2 minutes about something to your students. And they might not like that a whole lot, but I do what I want to do some days. And it helps me build capacity. I find the people who are like-minded, they'll come afterwards and be like, hey, Dr. Forbes, I like what you said. How do I get further involved in that? Continuous training. So I told you at the beginning, I'm a learner. I continue to try to learn everything that I can about this work. I am by no means any sort of expert, but by relying on people who are experts, that's been really great. One of the slides I skipped was a link to the Erie Arts and Culture website. We have a wonderful arts and culture organization here, and I've been able to reach out to them, and they've been able to supply me with artists in the area who represent different cultural backgrounds, who will come in and do a session with my students. And that allows me to have authentic voices represented. And typically we're talking about artwork, but when they talk about their artwork, they can't help but talk about their cultural and their perspectives. So that's been one of my strategies. Find a financial champion. So a lot of things don't happen without money. So I had to make friends with the dean. And butter people up. Sometimes you have to nod and smile. And then facilitate dialogue for understanding. When there were people who disagreed with me and we did have a lot of pushback, I had to stand strong and really know my stuff and be able to come back with reasonable responses that would help to move their thinking, to shift their thinking. Hold on. I must have put that slide in a different place now. I've played with the slideshow 100 times at this point. But I'll talk a little bit about that. So to facilitate that dialogue for understanding, I first needed to let them vent at me and tell me what a horrible socialist I am and how I'm ruining the United States of America and should take certain books off my bookshelves. And then I had to talk to them about universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, response to intervention, which they're already teaching and incorporating, and how those are pieces of this culturally relevant work. And then try to expand their understanding and knowledge of what cultural relevancy means and how we can sustain the educators who are coming into the pipeline. It's been successful in some cases and not successful in other cases. I subscribe to a theory that was identified by a gentleman named Everett Rogers. It's called the diffusion of innovations theory. He talks about things like social capital and champions and the chasm, and telling us we have to monitor progress when you're trying to make these innovations. It kind of looks like this. It's a normal curve. It's a bell curve. At the beginning are people who are early adopters and innovators. And that's you and me. That's those of us on the call who are like, culturally relevant, yay. And we start to really push it. If we don't build that social capital, though, and we don't build capacity in our organizations, you hit a point where there's a gap between these early adopters and innovators and everyone else. And if you don't fill that gap, that's when things stagnate and don't change. And you'll be like, well, a couple of years ago we tried this, but it didn't really go anywhere. So you've got to jump the chasm. And I like this image in particular because it shows a shark fin down here. So you're jumping the shark. All right. You're just going to move it along and get others on board. And that's where this gentleman at the top says, this looks interesting, but is it for me? I try to bring those types of people. They're like, they've been standing on the outskirts for a while, bring them to some sort of a professional development session. I might not call it a CRSE session. I might call it a inclusive syllabus session, but it's CRSE stuff. And then I get them on board. And right now we're at the tipping point where I have enough people on board that we've adopted the competencies for our JEDI group, which is our equity diversity group on campus. And we're using them across campus, not just in the education department. So through my little steps, I think I'm having some big impact. I had to keep going though until I hit that tipping point. If I hadn't continued in the face of diversity or adversity, I wouldn't have been able to jump that chasm. And a lot of that relied on social capital, finding people that other people value. So distinguished faculty and getting them on board. Champions for the work, people who want to see this work played out and getting them to talk about it using the vocabulary that's in the competencies. That was very helpful. And the result of my little activity here was that I created a syllabus that's now in the approval process for all undergrad students. We are using CRSE across campus. We've reached the tipping point, and you can see my little graphic here is we have now climbed the mountain and we are celebrating. So this is not my work alone. This is the work of me, my colleagues who were in the community of practice, my colleagues who are here on campus. And it really just took me to look beyond the current situation and envision something creative and new, to do something that hadn't been done before, make an education course that all students on campus can take. So my key points are: you have to crawl before you walk, before you run, think outside the box, make sure that you're connecting all of this to things that people who are giving you pushback already know about, like universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, RTI. Context is important. Make sure you use multiple lenses. I can look at things through my lens, but I also asked many colleagues. I asked students. I asked community members, especially those from our immigrant population here in Erie, to look at the things I was doing and give me feedback. It was really helpful for me to have all of those multiple lenses. Believe and persist. Build your capacity, get to that tipping point, and after the tipping point, it becomes so much easier. So small steps, big impact was the title. I hope that I gave you an idea of how I went about the work. And do you want to sit and talk about anything? What questions do you want to ask?
I'm curious about the pushback with the challenges. What areas and what type of pushback were you getting?
So our School of Ed faculty, we're a Catholic institution. We're extremely conservative. Our School of Ed faculty, some of them were like, this is controversial. I saw a news article. One of our local schools is suing the state government to get these CRSE competencies repealed or whatever. And people are like, this is controversial. We shouldn't be talking about it right now. So that was a lot of the pushback I encountered among my own colleagues. One of my colleagues is a special education teacher, and she was instrumental in helping us overcome this because she was able to pull up multiple examples of how this work helps students who are typically identified for special education, over-identified for special education, and point out how this type of educational approach could help reduce that over-identification of our minoritized populations. So when we encountered that pushback, it was important for me to find a colleague to bring on board who was respected, and for both of us to talk openly with faculty and not avoid the conversations. Some of the pushback was from other departments, who the arts department in particular, oh, you can't be approved for this particular, aesthetic reasoning because you're not actually an arts person. So I had to dig up my resume and show that I've taught dance in the past and that I do have an artsy background. I had to show some examples of things. So I had to really prove myself that I knew what I was talking about. And that also helped, being able to show that I had the credentials, being able to show who the constituents were that I had worked with, that I had collaborated with. All of those things showed that it wasn't just me talking crazy talk, which is kind of what it started out as, that crazy lady. So that was a lot of how I overcame those challenges.
Yeah.
And I think it helps that I'm a white woman, right? Because I have a freedom to speak out that I think my colleagues of color don't necessarily have. They're a little bit more hesitant. And that's where I found I know that I have people who have expertise here. They do not want to take part in the work. They're like, that is not my
Wow.
work. That is your work.
Okay.
So that's been really interesting that I do have a little bit more freedom, and I'm already tenured, which helps a whole lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions?
Leigh, do you, after going through this challenge, do you think you will try to develop any other courses that combine both the CRSE and the liberal studies core requirements?
Global citizenship is next. We have a global citizenship that I think fits perfectly with our urban ed class. So I anticipate urban ed will be my next one. Absolutely. I'm not quitting. I'm going to get these all integrated, and I'm going to force every student on campus that I can to take my classes. So
Great. I'm happy to hear that. I'm also wondering, do you think that you will have any challenges when it comes to advising day of other faculty knowing that these courses will be available and that they're not strictly for School of Ed students?
So I have a colleague, her name is Ann Baumberger here at the university, who has recently created a list of all the courses she could find that had elements of these competencies in them. And we're going to try to develop some branding around that so that we can brand anything that's in this track, and then potentially, not this year or next because I'm super busy, but in the future, create a minor or, some sort of thematic strand for students who want to study in this area. We have a women's studies minor and sort of a diversity minor right now, but neither one of them are what we're envisioning. So we have to build it. It'll take me a little time, but I anticipate getting it done at some point. I'm pretty persistent. I don't give up easily.
That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we are at the end of our time, so I would like to invite you to continue this collaboration. First, you can continue the collaboration by joining PEDC. It's free. Don't we love that word? They are
Yes.
located at paeddiversity.org. And right when you go, there will be a button that says join PEDC. Click it. It's free. It'll walk you through the process. And then know that you can reach out to anybody who's offering any of these webinars, and they will offer you free coaching for your institution. So if you should want to bring one of the presenters from the series to your institution and get a little bit of advice, a little bit of coaching, we are all excited and ready to do that. If you would like in particular to reach out to me, I am available at Gannon University in Erie, Pennsylvania. My phone number is on the slide for my office phone. My email is on there. I would welcome you to seek me out at any point in time. I'm always excited to talk about this work.